one. Oh my goodness. It's round two, people. It's Frankly Speaking. I'm your host, Timon and Farley. Thank you for tuning in to the Square Media Network. It's the podcast you can listen to and view at the same time. I don't know a lot of podcasts that are giving people that.
They
right?
aren't.
We are.
I usually don't look this way when I do my podcast.
You mean you don't look good?
No.
Oh, you just woke up like this?
I do not wake up like this.
Oh,
well,
okay.
I go how I do wake up at my show, but I try to get a little bit better for you.
Clearly, I have a guest here. People, you are so astute. You pay attention. I love you guys. Miss Nichole Harris is joining us tonight in the studio,
Happy to be
a.k.a.
here.
Darling Nikki.
Yes.
From the He Said, She Said podcast.
Okay.
Now, you are one of two in the dynamic duo of this show, right?
That is correct.
Do you want to talk about your co-host?
I don't.
Don't want to
No, I'm just kidding. My co-host, Suber, he goes by Sue, the loving man, loving all the mothers and the aunties.
And the aunties.
Yeah.
Aunties, if you're out there.
He's a good friend of mine. We talk about a little bit of everything, pop culture,
Okay.
topics that are relevant to us millennials, people in the Black community, whatever we feel is something that is on the tips of everyone's tongue at the moment. We generally try to present opposing views, and I don't think that's intentional. It's just our personalities. So he likes to play devil's advocate, kind of like you. So so I feel like
in one show
this
I'm already
is
the devil's
going to
advocate. I like this.
This is going to be a lot like that. But it's
Good.
Yeah, it's fun.
Good. So if for the viewing audience that would like to hear what you guys have to say, where would they be able to find you guys?
At the moment, they can find us on SoundCloud.
Okay.
We'll be on iTunes soon, but I will share the information later, I guess, so you can post to social media, but it's just He Said, She Said podcast.
Very nice.
That's it.
Got to listen to you guys a good bit. Very entertained on my drive to work or on the treadmill or wherever I can find the time to
We appreciate
tune in.
it.
Obviously, you're much more of an adept podcaster at this point than I am, so I really appreciate you, helping a new guy out.
Whatever.
A little bit. Okay, good. Well, tonight's topic, guys, is cancel culture. So, I think it's a very relevant topic. I think everybody who is listening probably has an iPhone, has some access to social media, is in some way aware of the temperature of a lot of things when it comes to issues or just current events. And we've got a lot of very charged things that happen in our culture seemingly on a regular basis.
Yeah, I was going to say, sometimes it's hard for me to keep up, honestly.
Right.
They're canceling people
Left
and
right.
right.
You can get. Do you ever feel like you're in danger of that with your? You're a podcasting personality. You have a voice and a platform. I don't know where you guys stand in terms of like advertising right now, but I understand that. That's something to be considered when you're
the goal
targeting
is
your audience.
definitely monetization. It's not something that I think about at the moment, probably because we haven't grown to that point, and so it's not anything that I'm super fearful of, though. To be honest, I thought about when I started doing this, completely deleting or deactivating my Twitter and starting anew, because I think about some of the things that I said 10 years ago, and if they were to surface and people or resurface and people try to hold me
accountable
for the person that I was at 25, I'm not going to apologize for it. Like, I've grown so much in this year.
Sure.
So I'm not going to deny that I said those things at the time, but
it
they're
would be
not a
preferable if
reflection
you
of
could
who I
just
am.
move forward without
exactly.
someone ladling what you said
Right.
as
That's kind of what cancel culture is.
Good. So just for everybody's sake, we want to kind of define some terms here. When it comes to cancel culture, the definition I'm using is a variant of the term cancel culture. Describes a form of boycott in which someone has shared a questionable or unpopular opinion or has had behavior that is perceived to be either offensive or problematic.
Oh my gosh. I typed out notes for the definition, and it's very similar to
Very
this. It's eerily similar.
Oh, man. So I'm doing good. You're not going to cancel me yet. All right,
no,
great.
not yet.
And so this person is canceled by being boycotted by their followers or supporters, often leading to declines in careers and or fan base.
Holy cow.
So it's something that I think also dovetails into the other kind of right below the surface topic when we talk about cancel culture or outrage culture is free speech.
For sure.
Because that's what we're really digging into, right? It's really saying, hey, what is permissible in, quote, can we say polite society anymore? Can we even use that term?
it's free speech. You can say whatever you want. It's just, the way that it's going to be perceived is to be determined.
It sounds like college voluntary workouts as a college basketball player. I could volunteer to not be there,
Right.
and I could also volunteer for the negative fallout that might come. So in looking at canceling call-out culture, who's doing it, who's the recipient, who's the, I don't want to say perpetrator necessarily, but who's the person on the other side of that, in your opinion, in a broad sweeping way,
Right.
where do you see it? Who do you see doing it? And where do you really see the lines along which you could be canceled?
Wow. Okay. So it's funny because I feel like it's this very multi-layered process. Like you said, someone kind of makes this like inappropriate or like egregious comment, and then people try to connect the dots between older comments that they've made to kind of establish this pattern or this history of them being this person. But I feel like the people that I generally see doing it most, and I hate saying this because, I consider myself to be more of a liberal or progressive, but it's us. I think that we're generally the ones that are that have a bone to pick with like everyone, I hate the term social justice warriors, but people that are just, out there
I do too.
always wanting to like fight. I think that they are generally the ones that are calling people out and calling for this open boycott of someone. And I don't know why that is. I think it's just, conservatives or whatever. People, we're not going to get into labels.
You people.
We're not going to get into labels, but I just feel like they are just a little less critical of people. You know what I mean? I think they're a little more self-serving, and it's like, I don't care, this doesn't affect me in any way, and so I don't care.
The conservative side, you would say.
Yeah.
Okay,
So it's like, I don't really care about what they said. This doesn't affect my life in any way.
So when you say it's us, I'm in part taking that as meaning
You said us?
You said us.
You mean me as in the us. Okay.
As
you
in
said
you
us.
and the
Okay.
us, right? Because I'm on that other dark.
That's why I wanted
I'm
to
on
make
the dark
sure.
side. Oh, yes.
Draw the distinction.
I personally draw a little bit of a distinction between someone who's a left-leaning person and someone who's a liberal, right? Because there's a lot of things about a, quote, traditionally liberal viewpoint that I would agree with, right? I'm very much for the equality of sexes and different things like that. But the left-leaning moving into that, to me, very easily offended or looking to be so, generally because people that are in a minority group or traditionally in a minority group tend to, in my opinion, align themselves more on that side, right? In a broader way. So when it comes to those aspects, do you think it's because of the minority aspects of a lot of the situations? Because we have people with the different, we can talk about some of the other maybe examples that we've seen in cancel culture recently, but it's generally someone who's in a minority dynamic taking offense with someone else's opinion of something.
Yeah, I would say so. Or people that consider themselves to be allies of those like underrepresented groups, and so they want to be that voice or, the defender of those groups of people.
Self-elected.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you find yourself as a knee-jerk reaction in some of these situations that we can get into here in a second, being in that space where you feel yourself a little bit,
What does that mean?
I just felt like the rise up part of, you talking about sticking up for somebody, right? You're taking taking up the case of someone who's in that space. Do you feel like that's personally for you something that you talk about, maybe even on your podcast, right? Where
every now and again, I would say so. I consider myself to be strategic and logical, and so out of emotion, I might have an emotional reaction to what was said, but I try to gather more facts before I form like an opinion about this person, or just assume that they're horrible and they need to be canceled because they made a stupid comment.
And the cancel thing, guys, that we're talking about, I want to make a distinction between canceling and disassociation, right?
Okay.
Because you could say something to your point that there's free speech, there's having the consequences of what you say is going to, especially if it elicits a reaction, right? To say, darling Nikki, on your show, you said something that I really don't approve of. I'm no longer going to listen to your show. I'm not going to follow you on Instagram anymore. You no longer have my patronage if you're a place of business. The difference in cancel culture to me is when I'm now actively coming after your life whether it's professionally or even personally, because you see instances of people publishing their address.
Yeah.
Or this is where this is where they work. Send the desire to get them fired to their place of business, going after advertisers, something like that. I think that's a difference, right? So, and just looking at some of the examples that we probably know a lot about, right? I think we have James Charles had the Tati beauty cosmetic YouTube world.
Yes.
Sarah Silverman wears blackface. I think Ellen DeGeneres sat next to George W.
Bush, yeah.
Kanye, who's
The
had
list
some
goes
stu-
on.
it's a little bit hard to defend Kanye with slavery was a choice.
Right.
Some of my two biggest instances, probably the Kevin Hart dynamic, obviously being disqualified from the Oscars based on cancel culture undertones, and then Dave Chappelle's, which if you haven't seen was great. I don't know about you guys, but Chappelle's show, some of the funny
It's a
stuff out there,
classic
right?
show. Yeah, absolutely.
Right. So the Sticks and Stones Netflix special. And then this gentleman in the corner who is the now former GM of the Astros.
I was going to ask who that was because that was the only face I didn't recognize.
So this gentleman, apparently there was a pitcher that was embroiled in a domestic violence case with his current significant other, was traded to Houston, pitched a great game. I think either deciding or moving the Astros into the World Series. And this guy was making some comments in the locker room. Thank God we got effing so-and-so as a pitcher, and there were several female reporters in the room, one of which was supposed to have been wearing a like domestic abuse awareness bracelet or something like that, and they felt threatened or whatever else, and incidentally this guy is fired as the GM of the Astros, right? So in looking at some of these cases, and obviously with Kevin Hart, comments to your point about scrubbing your Twitter or starting over there, no longer being invited. We would like to invite you to not now host the Oscars, even though you've already apologized. Don't want to do it again.
Right.
I think the undertone there is some of these are good instances or would be bad instances that you know of. What would be your opinion there?
Well, I think the Kevin Hart thing, I think it's a bad instance. I do feel like he was sympathetic. And he's still trying to navigate this world of fame and celebrity. And
had some bumps in the road too.
Yeah, he's had several. And I think that's the thing, like not all of the offenses are old, you know what I mean? Like I think there was a couple years ago his son turned 1 and he had a Cowboys and Indian themed party, and so a lot of people took great offense to that. I don't know what the head hanging is for, so I need you to let me know.
Well, I'm gonna let you finish your statement, Taylor Swift, and then I'm gonna
Okay.
and then I'll tell you what I think. Go ahead.
All right. So I think honestly, though, it's kind of like Newton's law of physics. You know, for every action, there's an equal and opposite like reaction, and so I think these people have an act, and then we react as the public, and then I think what's most important for us as like viewers or fans is how they handle the situation afterwards. And I think a lot of people felt his tonality was insincere and that they didn't buy into it, and so for that reason they felt that canceling him was warranted. So a lot of times I don't even think people care so much about what you do as much as they care about like how you handle the fallout after, or like how apologetic you seem.
So, but Kevin Hart did apologize.
Yeah, but I mean, a lot of what I saw on Twitter was people saying that they didn't think that he was sincere, and so that was it. So because they didn't buy it, he's still canceled. We don't care.
10 years ago.
Yeah.
That doesn't factor in.
I don't think that it's fair. I think that there should be a statute of limitations because people do change, and I'm sure he's met a lot of people that are homosexual and may have changed his opinion of it, or he's just grown up as a person. He's like, that was a dumbass comment that I made, and I really don't care who my son loves, but people are holding him accountable for things that he said literally 10 years ago, which is ridiculous.
Now, did you get a chance to see Sticks and Stones?
I did, and I did not take offense at all.
At all.
And
there was a massive outcry toward Netflix, towards Dave Chappelle about the jokes around being trans, transgender dynamics and other things like that. I thought one of the most interesting things about the actual bit that he did, like the actual special, was when he was imitating who he would eventually describe as being the public, of being the audience, that even though nothing he said was very politically related,
Yeah.
I'm going to pull up something, and, you're out of here, right? And everybody said Trump, right? And I think that, to me, was probably one of the biggest things that jumped off the quote-unquote page or off the screen, is that we really have this Tupperware container dynamic in our society, right? Like, if you espouse one view in this lane, then you must automatically be aligned with all these other things, which then would immediately make you potentially cancelable.
Right.
Is that a word?
It is tonight.
Tonight it's a word. I have the gold microphone. It's a word. So, in that kind of sense, you had mentioned that you feel like it's a little bit more left aimed at right.
Yeah, and I think
on issues.
And I think with his special, the point that he was making, you can't offend certain groups. And so I have always been an ally for, the LGBTQIA community.
Okay.
And being so, obviously I'm not a part of the community, but I didn't take offense to what he said, because I felt like he was just pointing out the differences between us as people.
Sure.
And when he made comments about like different races and pointed out things in like the black community, no one found any of that, offensive. It was like, that's fine. You know what I mean?
Right.
Talk about that as much as you want, but don't talk about gay people, or trans people. And so I think nowadays it's more who you're offending or who you're making the target of your conversation that matters more than like what you're saying.
Do you think that we're really looking at, to your point about like the who dynamic, who's saying and then who's also listening, right? Like, I feel personally, as a African American, a 0.5 guy here, that it's got to be tough being a white comedian right now.
Yeah.
If you are a straight white, and by straight I mean in terms of your sexual orientation,
Right.
straight white guy, you have enough tough time, because you can't really, to your point, like, who can be offended?
Right.
If I'm automatically going to be walking through a minefield of potential microaggressions or worse, if I can't point out, which is, I think, is to me the best aspects of comedy, is pointing out the idiosyncrasies of the human condition,
Right.
and saying, when he said that he was like, trans is a little bit funny because if I'm a black guy, but I feel like I'm Chinese,
Right.
and those kind of dynamics are humorous, right? But right now, I think a lot of things that are being, people are having their intent dictated to them. Like, this is harmful, and you meant to be this way because you see that. Is there any aspects, especially when we talk about Square Media Network being a very much an Afrocentric kind of focus? Do you feel like that there's avenues where that really does play, right? Where there's really people taking shots and getting away with it, in a sense, as an African American woman? Do you feel there's some times where it's like, okay, I don't necessarily think I should cancel somebody on this dynamic, but we're playing with the other side of free speech?
That's a really good question.
You're at the Comedy Zone. It's a white comic talking
Right.
about, y'all know y'all like this. How do you feel about that?
I don't think that I personally feel any type of way, honestly, because I realize that comedy is an art, and I try not to take things too personally. I do understand how someone else might take offense, and so I think that's where we are right now. You have to understand that you are free to say whatever you want to say, but not everyone may be receptive or love it. And so that's just, the risk that you take. You have to roll the dice. And so it's scary, I think, because this is your livelihood. And if you make a comment that someone deems offensive and then enough people agree with them, then, loss of sponsorships and, tour dates and whatever.
Or whatever.
Yeah, so the list goes on. I guess it just depends on how much, skin you have in the game. And then I think it depends on like your status.
Okay.
Because I think, Kevin Hart has gotten to a place where obviously he is a black comedian. He's a comedian of color, but he has become like palatable to the masses. You know what I mean? He's crossed over. He's very commercial.
White people like him
exactly. And so I think that's when like white people know who you are, and you make these sort of comments, then it's magnified. Because Dion Cole had a special on Netflix, and he compared the black and white race a lot.
Okay.
And I think if a lot of people had seen it, they would have been like, "This shit is hella offensive."
Right.
But no one knows who he is. He's just, Andre's friend on Blackish. No one was checking for his, no one was checking for, no one's checking for his special. So he can get away with it because he doesn't have the audience.
Okay.
So I think
so there's a level of how much people know me adding weight to how I decide to be offended. So if the same person, if two different people, one of varying statuses say the same thing, it's just the visibility thing.
I think
is gonna
so.
Drive your dynamic.
Because I think people are like, you know better. You know what I mean? Like, we've given you this platform, and this is what you do with it. You make these, incendiary comments. How dare you? So yeah, I think the status plays into it for sure.
So how did you feel about Kanye personally when he went through his
Which
TMZ?
part? Okay.
He's had some moments.
Let's unpack which one you're talking about.
Obviously we had, and one of the things I'm talking about is like, is there some things where canceling or the outrage is justified, right?
Yeah.
For me, I want to draw a clear distinction, right? Like if it's the Harvey Weinstein dynamic of the world.
I was going to say Bill Cosby, Harvey Weinstein, R. Kelly, they're canceled for
That's
me.
tough, right? I think it runs, and we can get into this a little bit later, about how that impacts our judicial system, candidly, right? Because if, to your point about status, am I able at all, given that the average bear, I've literally seen homeless people that have a smartphone, right? That have internet access or whatever else. The likelihood of me having an unbiased jury of my peers is, this is a celebrity, right? Where do you feel like, or if there's any examples that you can say of a justified or a cancellation that needed, a justified cancellation in your opinion? Have you seen one out in the wild?
In the wild?
That's right. Just out there roaming the plains.
Off Tryon Street?
After 10 p.m. There's a lot of things that need to get canceled on Tryon after 10.
Everything on Tryon Street, probably. I mean, if we're not talking about celebrity or just generally speaking.
You have your own podcast. You don't have to ask.
Frankly speaking.
Go ahead. Frankly speaking, talk to me.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, with R. Kelly, I felt that was justifiable.
Okay.
It's funny because when I was younger and, he was making music with Aaliyah and she was his protege. That's the word that we'll use. I didn't realize how inappropriate the relationship was. You know what I mean?
Okay.
And so I think the older that I got and the more that I understood, pedophilia, I was like, this is not okay. And then when I listened to his, sexually charged lyrics, it's just like, I don't know. I just felt kind of skeevy listening to it because it's like,
Okay.
I don't think I've listened to an R. Kelly album since, what was it, TP2.com? So 2002. I have not listened to his
Nothing
music.
Stepping in the Name of Love.
I have not. And everyone that's around me knows that if I'm there, it's got to get turned off. I am removing things from my catalog that he produced, he might be featured on.
Really?
Yeah. I can't do it. That's one for me that is just.
So do you think that that's, to my point about cancellation versus disassociation, do you think that you're walking more on the disassociated side as opposed to canceling? I don't know that I've ever seen you in the streets calling for R. Kelly's head on a spike, but
I have not.
You are taking him out of your iTunes library.
I am. Okay. Yeah. Because I think in that case, I feel like a lot of times when it's a celebrity, there's this conversation about separating the artist from the art. And with his, again, because he's had so many improprieties with young girls, it's just difficult for me to do because all I hear is him singing to these young girls. And so that is my personal stance. I know a lot of people are capable of doing that. And so they still listen to the music and they think he's, deplorable. But
right. So R. Kelly would be one. And I think that's kind of falls into the point about saying, hey, there's some stuff that's a little bit.
Yeah, because
if you want to make a
so
comment
much evidence,
about, yeah.
So it's just I can't.
Did you watch the
away.
specials? What of the surviving?
The surviving R. Kelly. I watched a little bit of it, which Dave Chappelle talked about because he didn't want to be a part of it.
Dave Chappelle did back away from that.
Yeah. So yeah, I watched it.
Okay. Did you follow any of the other stuff? I think James Charles, where a lot of the stuff that was said about him, apparently. He had another video that came out to disprove it. Mm-hmm. And I think another interesting aspect of just cancel or outrage culture is that it seems to vanish almost as quickly as it's come, right? So it's a pack of piranhas that swoops over your career, and then, oh, wait a minute, something shiny, and someone else has offended me more in this moment.
And then I think a lot of them do enough damage control to like win over the public again. But then, like you said,
The canceled person has.
yeah. But
Okay.
to your point, I do feel that because things happen so frequently, it's hard to keep up with who we've canceled. I mean, like Daniel Caesar made comments earlier this year.
R&B artist.
R&B artist Daniel Caesar, and I think it was just like, people of color were too easily offended, something to that effect. And a lot of people were like, you're canceled, I'm not listening to you anymore. And then he dropped his new album, and I was like, well, is he still canceled? Because I really like this song with Brandy.
Yeah.
So sometimes I have to check in because I'm like, are we still doing this? Can I drink Pepsi? Can I go into H&M during my lunch break? I don't know.
Oh, because of the monkey
The
and
monkey,
the jungle.
yeah.
So stuff like that. My biggest, it makes me want to throw a rock at something. This idea of microaggression, this idea of I'm choosing to take what you've said as being not even a misstep at best, right? But being an absolutely premeditated attack or violence or whatever else. Anytime someone's talking about like, oh, that you're doing violence against me by the opinion that you hold, outside of someone whose opinion is that you need to physically assault somebody or whatever else, right? Because I think, for me personally, that free speech means free speech, even if it's not something that I agree with, or even if it's in and of itself a deplorable mindset, right? Like I think there's a guy, Richard Spencer. He's a white nationalist, white supremacist, whatever else, who's booed off of stages and people don't want him to talk at universities or whatever else. As long as he's meeting the criteria of saying he's not calling for active violence, then he still is protected under free speech. Now, it doesn't mean I agree with that. And I think there's a lot of also things that, like, if you support somebody's ability or right to do that, then you yourself are getting put in in the bin with them, right? So do you feel like minorities or people, you being an advocate of the LGBTQ, I'm sorry, I lost the last couple of them, I apologize.
That's okay.
Do you feel like there are significant elements that give credibility to the fact that like, you're really too sensitive, or it's really the reaction isn't warranted by whatever was said? I personally feel like there's a lot of that.
I know you do.
All kind of folks.
I am a Libra. I like balance. So
Okay.
I agree with you on one hand, but on the other, I don't have any control over how someone feels about what was said. And
Okay.
so one of my favorite things to tell people is that is your truth. Because, however they feel, that is true for them. I may not agree, but that's how they feel about it. And so I have to respect their truth. So,
So do you really?
in their mind, it's warranted. And I respect
So you're
that.
good with just letting people tag things as their truth?
What do you mean?
There's no such thing as your truth.
I disagree.
It's just not. There's the truth.
I disagree. I always say that there are three sides to the story, his truth, her truth, and the truth. I think the truth is generally somewhere in the middle, because I think that two people can experience something together and their recollection of the events may be different, but that's how you remember it. That's true for you, and the way that I recall it is true for me. It may not be exactly what happened. So,
And you're cool with letting that fly, making truth being determined by the individual opposite of you.
I'm not saying that I let it fly. I'm just not always going to fight someone on it.
So what if R. Kelly's truth is how he behaved?
What I don't know what he would have to say to defend his actions. Like, what would be his truth? There's video of him with young girls.
I'm sourcing it. Please believe people as I hold the gold microphone. I'm not advocating
If you
for
point
it.
out the fact that this microphone is gold one more time,
I just. That's why I can't have nice things.
really.
My point is, I think that there's aspects of the truth, and we, as human beings, want to have definitive things.
Facts, yeah.
If I hear once, I hear it a million times. Timon, you're so black and white about things. You're so thus and so about whatever else. And I think that there's an aspect, or know that there's an aspect, that we want those things, right? And I think that there's also things that are beyond the pale, obviously, of what's decent and what's whatever else. And this leaving things up to everybody's truth makes the world... Like, if I said my truth is okay for me to take your iPhone,
I mean, you can try. That
You can
is
try.
your truth. You can
You
try.
can try.
Yeah. And then you can have a black eye.
Oh,
'Cause that's
I
my
forgot.
truth.
I got a half black eye already. So, when it comes to our culture now, looking at, I saw another definition of cancel culture being outrage culture.
Okay.
You mentioned that the comedian was saying they felt like people of color are too easily offended. There's a wash of things to me that feels like on a couple different spectrums that we are as a culture dealing with this just below the surface of it's our time for vengeance is the wrong word, but too long we've been on the short end of the stick, and now it's a chance for us to be no longer in that position, and we're going to take it to the nth level, the zenith of whatever's possible for us. Do you feel that that's something that you've witnessed, and it's almost like something that runs away with people, right?
Yeah, I would say that that's true to a degree. I think that we are in a very peculiar place right now where, like you said, I think a lot of like underrepresented people have felt that for so long we have not had a voice, and so now we are reclaiming our power or claiming it because maybe we never had it. And so I think we're going through these murky waters or these very strange times where it seems to most people that everyone is easily offended, and so we'll get to a place of balance eventually where people aren't so high strung and quick to react to everything that people say, and we will have a little bit more of this platform for like free speech without people having to be fearful of losing their job because they said something. Or
so you feel we're in a certain element of the arc of
Yeah.
a circle
Exactly.
that at some point people be like, okay,
This is too much. Yeah.
too many safe spaces.
Yeah,
I can't have a
absolutely.
comfort dog because somebody looked at me wrong.
Yeah, I think right now we're in a place where a lot of people feel uncomfortable, and that's fine. I think we have to kind of go through this for us to come to some sort of like common ground.
So do you feel, and kind of tying this to us both being brown people,
Oh, I didn't notice.
you did notice, you knew.
I don't see color.
Then how did you coordinate?
I didn't even
Getting
know that I did.
Okay. Where do you see that kind of wave cresting then? What would it take? Where does someone who identifies as left liberalish, one of the things like where does that go too far, and then is there anything to pull back? Because a lot of things that feel to me about cancel culture purely are almost like the manifestations of mob mentality behind a keyboard, right? The mob mentality is saying that people lose their own agency, right? You lose the sense in a mob that you're going to potentially do things, people burning down a sports facility when their team wins the championship, right? You wouldn't normally set a car on fire, but everybody's going that
Right.
way. Where do you see that eventually is there something that would happen
What's
to
going to
make
have
that
to happen? I don't
Yeah.
know. I'm thinking about the people that have been canceled in recent years, and I don't know who would have to be made an example of, or like the type of person, but I don't know. I'm feeling like it's going to have to be more like white women. And I say that because and I say that because it's just like, Ellen, you know what I
Okay.
mean? Sarah Silverman, these are people that people have long regarded as like allies or, very pro everyone.
member of.
Yeah.
Yeah, for Ellen, right.
And so I think when it's like, okay, now we're starting to single out our own, then it's like, wait a minute, I think we've taken this thing too far. Let's like reassess, let's
she's
pull
with
back
us.
and
Why are you
regroup.
guys
Yeah,
punching her?
this
Right.
wasn't a part of the plan. So I think once we get to that place where it's just literally too much, we're going to have to figure out, okay, what is okay, what's acceptable, what's permissible. Like this is really, it's too much. We're all walking on eggshells. We have no idea what we can say, who we're going to offend. And even like Dion Cole, his special, like I said, the large majority of people didn't watch it. But he made a comment about gay people, and he was like, I asked Wanda Sykes if I could tell this joke. You know what I mean? And so it's like, I think
Some of
lot of
my
times,
best friends are black.
Exactly. And so I
Right.
do think that a lot of times people check in with their friends that are a part of this community that they're like making jokes about, and they're like, oh, I don't care. And so they think that they have the green light to do it, and they don't think other people are going to take offense.
Right.
And then it still happens. Like even Dave Chappelle, I think he said he has a trans friend that he kind
in
of
the
ran,
audience or whatever.
ran his jokes by, and she was like, or I'm not, I think she identified as a she, took no offense to what he said, but people hung on to that one thing and just deemed it a cancelable
Which
offense.
is really interesting because I think that there's been times, I remember in college, and I went to 2 colleges, so I'll leave which one it was out.
Oh, Lord.
But I remember being asked to be part of a diversity council, and I was like, is this just because I'm the only one of these things is not like the others, right? Like you get the...
They're like, this is a double whammy. Like,
Right. And the pressure
right.
of having to speak for the masses in some kind of way, right?
Yeah.
That, well, if this may not be offensive to me, Dave Chappelle's trans friend or whatever else, and then Dave goes on and says whatever he says, maybe with the blessing or whatever not. Do you feel like you run into that? I mean, you mentioned like white women. I know you're aside from your incredible podcasting career, you're also a career woman, right? Do you run into that into the workplace where you feel like those kind of things where on a smaller level that you can almost feel why somebody would take it to the macro version of going after somebody based on something that you hear in the workplace, right?
Honestly, not in the workplace. Like,
Really?
I think
Okay.
not at this job. I don't know how much attention you pay to my posts, but I just love the job that I have now. So I have nothing negative to say. I have never felt at this place that I had to like represent, a larger group. But I know a lot of friends that do, I have a lot of friends that do feel that way. It's just not something that I personally experience in my job.
Right. Because, I mean, that was one of the bigger turning my head around. One of the big things I've been excited about with having Frankly Speaking is to talk with people who maybe we're like tonight where we're discussing a issue with relatively similar views and a little bit of variance here. But talking to someone who's coming from the same issue from a completely different topic. And I have a couple friends, one in particular who really turned my head around about being an African-American woman in the workplace. And some of these things I'm like, oh, we're just being sensitive as African-American people, right? Like, to me, part of it is, yes, I have a white dad, right? So I don't necessarily attribute those people like this in the same way. And so maybe my level of sensitivity is different, but it doesn't mean that it's not there.
Right.
Right. And I think sometimes I want to be conscious of cancel culture pisses me the hell off. Right. Like, I can't imagine being so bent out of shape that you're going to literally go after somebody's life over something that's relatively general. Right. But then at the same time, to ask the question, people saying, hey, is there a level of offense that I don't see because I'm not trans, because I'm not gay, because I'm not whatever these things, I think the outside world would view me as being a black man. Right. That said, if you had to describe the guy who just was on the show with darling Nikki, visually describe him, right? Then I'm going to be associated with those things. Why do I not feel some of the things or whatever? It's just because I'm not. Maybe those things, like say Kevin Hart's description of if his son was gay, how he would react, right? I haven't had a dynamic where my father may have treated me that way because I was that, right? Do you think that those are kind of some of the same things that we mentioned about kind of having our time, right? We've been, I don't think there's necessarily more gay people now than there have been, right? But we have a culture that's much more welcoming of difference in that kind of way. Do you think that plays into it at all?
Yeah, absolutely. And I did want to agree with one of the points that you were making. So I also am what people would label as like a cisgender heterosexual black woman. And so I oftentimes try to listen to people to understand how they feel because I'm not gay. So I can't not relate to what you're feeling or experiencing. I can't speak to your experiences as a black man because I do feel like they're different. And there are a lot of times I've told my friends that I feel like I am walking 3 different paths, like one as a black person, one as a woman, and one as a black woman. I feel like all of those experiences are different. And so it's just, I think it's very interesting, just trying to navigate that, on a day-to-day basis. I will say this though, circling back to the conversation that we were having about work. So I don't ever feel like I have to, like, represent, Black women or womanhood at work. But I do think that I'm very mindful of the fact that people know that I'm a Black woman. And so I feel like I'm not my full self at work because I'm very calm. I'm very professional. And, I get into it with people via email all of the time because I'm not going to let people disrespect me. And so I'm very, like, polite about it, but I'm going to get my point across. But I try not to cross this line because I realize if I go too far, then they're going to forever see me where I feel. I'm going to forever be seen as this angry Black woman. Like, oh, I knew it was just a matter of time.
You know how they are.
Yeah, before sis showed up. So, yeah.
So when you say not your full self, and we take a little, there's a little side road here that I'd like to see what's down there.
I like tangents.
Good. When you say you can't be your full self at work, right?
Yeah.
One of the things, too, we're talking about free speech. It's a very, very separated dynamic, but a lot of conversations that I've had this week around Colin Kaepernick and the whole dynamic with him, that there's this aspect of Colin Kaepernick has to do a certain dance for the NFL. Right, wrong, justified, all the different layers that. Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
Is that there's something that you as an African-American woman or as just a woman that you feel like you have to do where your speech, quote unquote, is limited in the workplace?
Yeah.
And
well,
what are the
it's not so
factors?
much limited. I think I'm just conscious of the fact that if I cross this certain line, then perception is going to be different. And so I wouldn't say that I like code switch or anything at work, but I just feel like I don't have that privilege of displaying my full range of emotions. And obviously I'm not trying to have like a breakdown at my desk or anything like that.
Come off the top rope on somebody.
Yeah, but it's just if I'm upset about something, I feel like I have to take a minute, decompress, and then go back to trying to like resolve the issue without, again, crossing that line of being too angry. You know what I mean? Too overtly, blatantly just upset, because again, there's that stigma, there's this generalization that we're all angry Black women, and so I just don't want to have people see me as that forever.
So for my own education, for you, when you say code switch,
to me,
in
what
your
does
circumstance,
it mean?
well, I think we have an idea of what it means,
Right.
right? That I'm not the same person that I am at the cookout as I am in the office place.
Right.
Okay, fine. For you, what does that look like? What is that? You alluded a couple times to there's this line that you are precariously tottering,
like towing, yeah.
These red bottoms might step on the other side of this, and I'm in some trouble, right? I know you don't see color, but but
red bottoms. I don't know.
You know
what? Red. What is that?
When those are on the potential side, the dangerous side of that line, what does that look like for you, and how do you compare that? Do you feel like it's like there's a response that if it comes from me, it's going to be taken as this, even though it could be the exact same level of
Absolutely.
vitriol if it comes from a non-African American counterpart?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a colleague that is very passionate. That's the word that's used to describe her. And she's in sales, so that's kind of the expectation that's the personality that they have.
And you manage
what I mean?
people, right? You're in a leadership position in
I
your
am.
company. Okay.
Yeah. And this person is, very brash, entitled. They will walk over to someone's desk, have a conversation with them if they disagree about something. But I personally do not feel that I have that luxury of being able to just walk over, have conversations with people, voice why I'm frustrated, call something bullshit, and then be able to go back to my job, no questions asked,
Right.
No repercussions.
Do you feel like that's something that you've picked up on because you've seen someone else do that and receive that kind of labeling, for better or lack of a better term, or is it just something that you feel like your greater consciousness would lead you to say, you know what, maybe I need to stay out of these kind of waters?
I think it's a combination of both. Again, I haven't seen it in this role yet, but having seen it in previous roles, I feel like now I'm conditioned, like, okay, well, don't go there because you don't know how they're going to react to it. You know what I mean? Like, I've switched up my hair a lot at work.
Okay.
or just in my various roles.
I try to too as
it
well.
It looks good. I'm really feeling
I'm trying
this
something
look.
new with the time. I'm going to think about growing out the bangs at some point.
Okay.
Yeah,
I think that'll be dope. New year, new you. So I feel like, just having those experiences, just witness them, I'm very careful about how I present myself. But like I was saying, I've switched my hair many times. And so one time I had like faux locks, which are faux dreadlocks, just, in case people
I'm bald,
were
but
unaware.
I do know what locks
just
are.
making sure. But, this is live. So just in case someone else is like, what is this?
You're so inclusive. You're
I
just
try
bringing
to be.
people together.
I was very worried about how, this very like natural look was going to be perceived at my job. And they were like, oh, I love your hair. And I was like, okay. I don't have anything to worry about. Right. It's okay. They like it. It's okay. I can go back to my job.
They love me.
You really like me. Yeah. Okay. But no, those are things that I feel like, most people don't think about. Like, how is this going to be perceived when I walk in to work with like my natural hair out, or, you know what I mean? If I act up more than usual. So yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Do you think? I think there's a natural human thing of we label and we categorize in order to make definitions to understand the world around us, right? There's this whole dynamic too, and looking at the other side, like I'm obviously very irritated with. I hope it's obvious that I'm irritated with cancel culture, but the other side of it, I saw an interesting point, or I tried to find an interesting point. There's a guy, Aaron Friedman, who wrote an article for the Washington Post that basically was saying at certain points in the article that people who are against cancel culture are against democracy. Right? Because if we're looking at our elected officials, they're chosen by the people, whatever else, that if the people, the online community, the people who are going to pay for a Netflix subscription or going to watch the Houston Astros or whatever else are kind of in mass or enough of a dynamic where it's impacting the dollars and in a capitalist society,
Right.
That's its own form of democracy. I argue it's ruled by mob, but do you feel that that's a valid point, that cancel culture is in itself trying to put lipstick on a pig to me, but trying to say that it's a form of democratic rule?
I mean, obviously, this is the first time. Well, it's not obvious, but this is the first time that I've heard that argument presented. But that is very interesting, and I think it is kind of valid. I do think it's kind of a contradiction of democracy.
Come on, talk to me. Speak
Listen.
frankly here.
No, I'm agreeing with the point. I think that in this society where we are trying to, give voices to the voiceless, we're also silencing a lot of people, and that's really like the antithesis of what, free speech is supposed to be. So it's just like you have to pick a side.
So where'd you go to college?
UNCG.
Okay.
That's where I got my degree from. I spent most of my time at A&T. Shout out.
Spent most of my time. When it comes to, now I know you graduated last year, right?
Yes.
Just a young
Fresh
lady out here in the world,
face,
exactly.
yeah.
But one of the things I think I see the cancel culture trickle down of the microaggression, the easily offended, is two main areas, right? That we're seeing it in universities with young minds, right? Which is interesting to me too, right? Because the Oregon Trail, people are driving covered wagons across America fighting Apaches at 15 years old, right? right. Your favorite games. But you're 26 now and you're still a kid, and he's still learning blah, 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 right? College is the best 10 years of your life, whatever else. That we have a culture where it's changing, that college is not this petri dish of ideas. It's not a free form of exchange. You're seeing this like, well, if you don't think like this, the amount of, in researching and looking at stuff, obviously for this podcast, the folks on campus who are, from a conservative standpoint, being shouted down. And I candidly was trying to find the opposite way, like a conservative group showing up at a left-wing, liberal, whatever dynamic and doing the same thing, as opposed to engaging in the conversation, making your point, violently disagreeing. I don't mean violence in terms of physical whatever, but vehemently disagreeing. Do you see that? Did you see that in college? Or starting to see the shift or whatever else? For me, I'm old. So Facebook, when I was in college, you used to go check, see how many pokes I had after a away game. I had to use my college email address.
Senior year is when Facebook was created, and I didn't even join until like some years later. Because
Such
I was
a
like,
rebel.
this is stupid. I don't want to be a part of this. But I was just like, why do I want people that I don't care about to see what I'm doing? And now I'm about to go take a selfie and post it to Instagram when I leave.
Because it's been hours at least. I haven't posted anything.
But I don't know if the message has changed. I just think that the way that information is now like disseminated and shared, you know, we have such easy access to things because of like, you know, the internet and people having access to camera phones and posting things. And so I think things go viral a lot more. And so we're having those conversations a lot more freely. But I don't know. I feel like the message was pretty much the same when I was at college. Like, if you don't think this way, like if this, then that.
Right.
But people mobilizing and, you know, protesting, that's something that I feel like is a little bit newer. Like, yeah.
Well,
like
because the
en
platforms
masse.
have gotten
Exactly.
bigger, right? So if we're talking about free speech being
These
quote unquote
notes,
dead or
I feel
alive,
like I'm at like Elevation Church or something. This
Calm
is really
down now.
nice. Okay.
if I could have a couple New York bestsellers like the pastor, I wouldn't be mad. Free speech being a principle that supports the freedom of an individual or a community to articulate their opinions and ideas without fear of retaliation, censorship, or legal sanction.
I don't think that exists anymore.
Thank you. I'd love to believe it
not a
does,
thing.
but
No.
is it literally not a thing? Now, you mentioned one thing about how quickly information is disseminated, and I think there's a real interesting dynamic. I was a communications major, broadcast journalism, and the idea of I was briefly an associate producer for the former Fox Charlotte, and this idea of like you putting out information. Have you fact checked it?
Right.
Right? Is this? What is our exposure if this is, you know, take someone to task? I don't see that right now.
No.
Right? There's maybe some jumbled, thrown together apology or whatever else. Their supporters will still support them even if we've completely tried to go after them or whatever else about that.
No, it's not about facts anymore. And I think we're so reactionary now. People aren't even taking the time to do their diligence and read. Like, I mean, obviously, I don't like the term clickbait, but we understand what it is. Like when
Why
people,
don't you like the term?
Because
it's exactly what it is. You know good and dang well that's exactly what it is.
I think that the intention is to generate traffic, but as long as it gets a conversation started, I don't think people care. And so, you know, they do have these like articles where they know that they're attention grabbing, and so people are going to reshare. And I think that's the problem that I have with people. Like I said, they're not doing their diligence. They see these articles and they reshare it, and they have no idea what the actual
Didn't even read the whole
article
thing
says.
sometimes.
And so I think that's what's harmful. Now people are forming an opinion based on gossip. You know what I mean? They've done no fact checking, and they're just like, a friend of a friend of a friend said this, and I believe this to be the gospel, and I'm upset.
Do you feel like you're a little bit guilty of that right now?
I don't think so.
You said you only watched some of the documentary on R. Kelly.
Well, I had an opinion before that. Like, I don't think that watching the documentary was going to change my
None of the
opinion.
facts would have mattered, right?
I feel like that's not fair, because I think that the documentary was definitely framed to support this narrative already that he was a pedophile. So I don't think that it was going to change anything. And again, like there was the marriage to Aaliyah. There was this video that I saw years ago of him with this 14-year-old girl. Like, I don't think that I needed more examples of him being a pedophile to have formed an opinion. So
how do you think? Have you ever been on a jury? Been called for jury duty?
You want to know what's crazy? Yes.
I would love to know what's crazy.
I was called for jury duty once when I was in college, and my apartment burned down, and I called and I had to get out of it because I was like, I don't even have clothes to wear because my apartment's on fire. So I have not been called back since.
For kids watching at home, please don't burn your apartment down like Nikki did just to get out of jury duty.
Yeah, that's what it was. Collected that insurance check, and I was like, he'll never know.
Right. Well, so I think that's one of the biggest things too about the free speech that's being impacted by a lot of different things that we've already talked about. But when it comes to the impact to our legal system right now, the things that are impacting where people are getting their information from or whatever else, I think could you have any kind of unbiased jury of your peers in a Twitter, Instagram,
No.
Facebook status, 24-hour news cycle? Oh, wait a minute, that was actually wrong, so we're going to try to pull it back real quick.
I don't think so.
is America literally coming apart at the seams because of essentially social media and the power of it, in your opinion? Because, and we'll probably have to define what we think of America.
Right. I feel like, is it coming apart at the seams? Like I said before, I think it's this cycle that we're going through. So I think it's definitely coming apart to come back together eventually. I don't know what that eventually looks like or when that'll be or if I will see it in my lifetime. But I just think that that's where we are right now. It is utter chaos.
Well, one thing I wanted to do, I really appreciate you guys who have paid attention to the updates, the stories, the posts leading up to a Frankly Speaking episode. Last week, obviously, for different reasons, technical difficulties, we had to move today's show to today. But some of the participants who answered the poll questions, does cancel culture impact free speech? I wanted to read a couple of these and see, kind of just as we can kind of wrap up things, get your reaction here. Jason from Charlotte said, if we're talking about celebrities or public figures, I think we're starting to see a reversal in regard to mob mentality. He says he doesn't see an impact of cancel culture to free speech. People are still criticizing the government and president with regularity as free speech allows. So in that aspect, we're not in North Korea where you saying something against the elected or current officials. I feel like that holds up. It sounds like what he's saying is that we're kind of on that side of the curve that you're saying of like maybe coming back out of the mob mentality dynamic. I don't know that we're there yet personally, but
I don't think we're there yet.
Okay.
And I do think that people are, at least celebrities, it's a financial impact when this happens. I don't think that it's, long lasting because again, it's just like you said earlier, like a shiny new object. When we fixate on something else, they're able to kind of like regroup, rebrand if necessary, and then come back out, better than ever. But like I said, I think we will get there, but I don't think that we are there yet. I do not agree with Jason. What do you think?
I think we're just in the full flush of it, right? I think I literally had a conversation driving in today where someone was like, "Hi, I see you're doing cancel culture. You're doing free speech. Well, dream with me. Like, what if your show becomes something, whatever else, right? And then 10 years later, something that you said on the earliest iterations of Frankly Speaking now disqualifies you in some way." Because the other thing is like the things that I'm trying to think of what it was. It's going to sound, it's really weird, but I was listening to Silverchair, which is a grunge band from back when I was probably in 8th grade. Found the CD, is great, loved it. But it has a song called Suicide Dreams on there. And I was like, if this song came out right now, the outcry, because everybody's so sensitive about mental health now. And it's not that it's not, I think another thing too is important to recognize is that a lot of the sensitivity around certain subjects are sensitive, but it's going to a whole nother level, right? Where it's almost, to me, where you start to lose the importance of it, right? If everything I say, right, like let's say you and I are in the workplace, I'm a man, I say something to you that's critical of your work. Well, that's misogyny, that's classic toxic masculinity, whatever else. Then we see someone actually make some kind of lewd comment to somebody or whatever else. Well, that's also toxic masculinity. And there's no nuance between them, right? It's jaywalking and murder are the same thing and whatever else. So I think that's what we see a lot of.
Yeah,
There's not a lot of differentiation between.
I would agree with that. I actually don't think that we are oversensitive to mental health. And I know that we talk about it a lot, but I think oftentimes it's very disingenuous. So I don't know if you follow Summer Walker or listen to any of her music, but she's an R&B artist. Okay. And she's been under fire recently because she has been perceived by her fans as not being super like warm and welcoming in like meet and greets, and her concerts have been very like low energy to them. And so she, had gone on Instagram and apologized and said that she was an empath and she suffers from social anxiety. And so she needs to kind of scale back, and she cut her tour dates in half. Okay. And so people are now joking about her because she's taking the step back and trying to make her mental health a priority. And it's like, well, if this girl actually, exhibited some self-injurious behavior, then people would be like, oh, mental health is real. That's what I see a lot of people saying it after the fact, being very reactive to like someone hurting themselves, but not actually supporting someone for taking the steps to like heal.
Which is, I'm glad you brought that up, because I take a moment. The thing that pisses me off the most about this element of cancel culture is that there's no congruence with how the retribution that is aimed at somebody, there's no, well, if they did this, then you're also guilty for it, right? There's people that have worn blackface on Saturday Night Live that still have a job, and there's people who are losing movies because they've done it, right? And it just seems to be who, there's no way to say like, hey, if you kill somebody, you're going to get the death penalty, right? There's and it's probably you couldn't do that for rule of mob anything, right? Because it's by definition just kind of like whatever the moment seizes, right? But I think that's one of the biggest things to me, that we don't see the same dynamic. It's interesting at the beginning of the show that you pointed out that you're like, I think even as someone who identifies as being more liberal, left side of things, that it's more so that coming from that direction.
Yeah, I think that's spade a spade.
Sam from Jacksonville says freedom of speech doesn't mean freedom from consequence.
And that is the point that I would
If you don't represent a brand the way they like, you might get chopped.
Yeah, it's a capitalist society. So if enough people are offended, they don't necessarily care about what you said, but they care about how it impacts
these dollars.
Exactly.
I would agree with that. Do you feel like that in a small way applies to what you were saying about the way that you feel the need to present yourself in the workplace? With your brand being potentially, you don't want you seem to be, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I don't want the smell of being the angry black woman on me, so I'm going to be sure that I represent my brand as just professional woman in this way.
Well, no,
you feel it's the same?
No, I feel like on social media, I'm able to be a little bit of everything, like righteous and ratchet. Like I have that balance of both, but at work, not so much.
But
at work, not so much, because I feel like once I'm seen as like ratchet, or I do too much, or it's a little, Megan Thee Stallion, they're like, oh, I don't know if we want to invite her on this call, or if we want to continue to promote her. And so, I don't know. Maybe it is that. Maybe it's, no, it's not me wanting to protect my brand. I think it's just perception after they see me a certain way.
And I don't mean they're little. I'm using brand in quotes, obviously not your actual podcasting.m. And finally, we have Riley from Charlotte. I think it makes people not take a certain stance and try to keep everyone happy. They feel if they express their views and those views aren't deemed, quote, politically correct, and quote, they aren't the norm, they're immediately shunned. When this happens, it makes people want to keep their thoughts and beliefs quiet, especially around subjects like politics and religion.
What's the norm? I don't even know how you define
Well, I think politics can be somewhat a sensitive thing. Growing up in the Bible Belt, right? I don't remember it, in high school and stuff like that, people being too necessarily reluctant to talk about these things. But there's a real tension, especially around political discourse everywhere. As far as the amount of I work for Wells Fargo now. Clearly I like a good debate. You get into a conversation with somebody and there's this real hesitancy of anybody to say what they feel because they're so concerned. I don't necessarily get the feeling that they're concerned about what they think, but they don't know how it's going to land with you.
Right.
And then, like I mentioned about the Tupperware container thing, if I say for me, I'm a black guy, right? But if I was to say, no, I don't subscribe to when I played overseas in Italy, I remember a couple times, the first question I got was, oh, you voted for Obama? like you automatically assume because of this, then that was going to be the case. And I think now that there's this whole dynamic of saying our culture is so polarized, it's so tribe related, right? That you can't, for fear of being slapped into some kind of container that you don't want to be in, because of the repercussions socially or whatever else, you're not going to say what you may or may not think.
Yeah, I think that there's some validity to that statement, because it's just like, again, I can't remember who made the point earlier, but we do have free speech, but you know, you have to be aware that there could be consequences. And so I think people are fearful of reactions, consequences. And so because of that, they're like, I'm just going to keep my opinions to myself, or, you know, share them in my safe space. You know what I mean? Like my group chats or just amongst friends. And not so much with like masses or people that they have no idea how they may respond to it. Which
is interesting because we're not even talking about somebody saying something reprehensible, right?
Yeah.
I can't even say that I'm conservative, blah, 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 without, I'm personally not very worried about it. But but you do recognize with that people.
Right.
I mean, you get on Tinder, right? If you voted for Trump, you better swipe, whatever direction right now, right? Like people are automatically associating. It couldn't be that the last election cycle was choosing which STD you want for the next 4 years, and you got to pick one.
Right.
And now you're mad that I didn't, whatever else. Like, there's got to be more nuance to it than just, well, if you did this, then you are this whole other litany of other things. And I think that's kind of the aspect of a cancel culture that I find to be probably some of the most insidious dynamics. Finally, you've been canceled.
Shoot, okay. What did I do?
I
hope it was interesting.
You were more ratchet than righteous.
Damn it. I believe that. Okay.
You're known in the community to be right there anyway.
I know.
And then
I know
happened.
how I am, so it probably happened.
What does someone who's been canceled, what recourse, what road back is there? Because the other thing to me is that I feel like there's no real path to forgiveness.
Right.
Right? Kevin Hart could have apologized.
Yeah.
You hear a lot of people saying, like, hey, if you've been whatever else, don't apologize. Because once you do, then the bigger feeder fish are going to just keep coming because now you've acquiescence to their charge. You've now said, okay, you're right. Oh, and you see that with everything from, companies making apologies for stuff because, to your point, they want to protect that bottom dollar. But you said something on He Said, She Said, and darling Nikki's been canceled. Do you feel there's a road back for you, or you just have to wait for the storm to blow over?
I think it depends on how bad I want to be back at, because I realize now, as just a fan, how easily it is for someone to fall out of love with you. And so I don't know if I'm even going to want to take that journey and make the road back and fall into people's good graces again. I think once I'm canceled, it's just like, okay, so this is it. That's fine. This is who I am. Like, feel how you feel. Okay.
Not to piggyback on it, but like R. Kelly said, when a woman's fed up.
You know what?
I just got canceled. I just had to say. But you see what I'm saying, right? That there's a dynamic that same dynamic of an element in there of saying you hope that it just blows over. You hope that you can rebrand, but once the attention has been negative, it feels like I would think that it probably still looks like napalm because we're still talking about Kevin Hart with all Jumanji's out this weekend or whatever else. He's got new projects out. Yeah. He's still whatever else, but we're still talking about the Oscars.
I think the conversation will shift from that soon. I was listening to the Joe Budden podcast today, actually, and he's got a documentary coming out. And on Netflix, I think he's got a 6-doc deal or something, and so it's going to be called... Shoot, I can't remember. Don't Fuck This Up. I think that's what it's called.
Okay.
And so I feel like this is perfectly timed and strategic. And I mean, I feel bad because obviously he had the car accident, but I feel like this is the perfect time to like lean on people's sympathies. Like, I've gone through so much, and now I've come out a better person. And so I think
so. What is the documentaries on? What is it touching on? Do you know?
I'm not sure yet. No one really knows like what the tone of it's going to be. If there's going to be some element of stand-up or comedy to it, but they just know that he secured this deal with Netflix. So,
well, the counterpoint of cancel culture is that the internet gives everybody a chance. To me, right? I mean, you can have a podcast. You can. Wasn't Justin Bieber discovered doing songs in his mom's basement? Yeah, exactly, right? So it gives you, it's a potentially very double-edged sword, right?
A gift and a curse.
Yeah, and the stuff that you did 10 years ago could make you a star today, or it could be, the pin for your balloon.
Yeah.
There. Well, folks, I really appreciate everybody joining in. Thank you to my lovely guest, Nichole. Thank you. It was awesome to hear your perspective on things. Wish you all the best in your podcast moving forward.
Thank you.
Guys, please tune in to the other shows that will be coming up here. You can see them on the screen for the Square Media Network. This has been Frankly Speaking. And I'm Timon and Farley. Great to have you guys.
Have a good
Join
night.
us again next show.